gorilla DNA in our midst, more living fossils, and an overflowing mailbag. This is Genesis Week. And welcome to this episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary on news, views, and events pertaining to the origins controversy made possible by the supporters of Core Ottawa Citizens for Origins Research and Education, and exclusive right here on YouTube. Excellence in pirate broadcasting live from the now abandoned Arrow Cave. We bring you the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear, and we give glory to the creator while doing it. Once again, in the number one position of the most talked about show in science and technology on YouTube, you can find us at Wazooloo.com or GenesisWeek.com, or click the ever so convenient subscribe link up top. And don't forget, you can also peruse other episodes by following the links in the upper corners of each episode. I'm your host, Ian Juby. This past week, the preliminary analysis of the gorilla DNA sequence was published in Nature magazine, with loads of headlines making bold assertions about how identical gorillas, chimps, and humans are. Well, of course we're similar, but so what? Even if we were genetically identical, I have yet to see apes building spaceships, flying to the moon, or producing works of art or music, or performing stand-up comedy. Obviously, the differences run far beyond the genetic. But when one actually examines the genetic data itself, you quickly find out that humans and apes aren't quite as similar as they are made out to be. And the similarities actually contradict evolutionary theory. Chimpanzees are supposed to be our closest relative and therefore most identical to us genetically. A 2005 Nature article pinpointed the genetic differences between humans and chimpanzees at about 4% difference. Yet this most recent study said that the chimp was only 1.37% different, and gorilla was only about 1.75% different than humans, and the orangutan is about 3.4% different than humans. Now hold on a minute here. These are numbers that were published in a peer-reviewed journal. So, is the chimp 4% different? Or is it 1.37% different? But wait, it gets weirder. According to the Ensemble website, where you can download, analyze, and compare all these genomes yourself, we find that the chimpanzee genome is 3.35 billion letters long, while the human genome is a mere 3.1 billion letters long. Wait, that's an 8% difference in the number of letters alone. So to turn around and say that chimps and humans, which are at least 8% different, are in fact only 1.37% different, shows that either A, they're not telling you everything, or B, these scientists flunked high school math. Now, I happen to know it's because of what they are not telling you. Well, if they want to play that game, hey, I can play that game too. Let's use their numbers, which aren't actually numbers at all, but rather propaganda portrayed as data. You'll note that if we take into account the differences in base pair numbers, or the number of letters in the DNA, in the genomes of the different critters, and then we add that percentage difference together with the acknowledged differences from the latest Nature article, you quickly see that we are more genetically similar to gorillas and orangutans than we are to chimps. Now, these numbers are complete fiction. They do not portray reality whatsoever, but neither do the figures presented in the Nature article. My numbers are just as valid as the alleged values of similarity given in the Nature article. Why? Because of what they are not telling you. You see, when they make these comparisons, the scientists are ignoring huge portions of the DNA and homing in on selected genes that both the apes and the humans have, and comparing just those genes, ignoring the fact that these similar genes are often in radically different locations in the different organisms. We would, of course, expect the genes to be similar. They had a common designer. You'll notice that once a car manufacturer builds a transmission, they'll use that transmission in different vehicles. That's good engineering. That's smart engineering. The bracket mounts and such may be different in different vehicles, but the transmissions are essentially the same. That's evidence of a common designer, not evolution. So just what are the scientists ignoring to arrive at this 98.63% identical claim for chimpanzees? Well, they're ignoring orphan genes, genes which are exclusive to that organism and not found in any others. In other words, if we were to compare the hundreds of orphan genes between the apes and humans, we would find a 0% match between the chimps and the humans. But wait, it gets better. With last year's publication of the orangutan genome in Nature magazine, the researchers noted that, depending on which genes you compared, the orangutan was more closely related to humans than chimpanzees were. This week's report on the gorilla genome showed that the gorillas were as much as 30% dissimilar to humans, and in fact, if we went on the fallacious assumptions the researchers are using, the gorilla was more identical to humans and chimpanzees than the humans and chimpanzees were to each other. In other words, one could interpret the genetic data to mean that the gorilla was an intermediate organism between chimpanzees and humans. At the end of the day, none of this genetic information supports the idea of descent from a common ancestor because there's nothing common about the information. And in fact, it can be interpreted in a myriad of evolutionary scenarios, the majority of which disagree with the alleged fossil evidence for human evolution. However, it all fits in quite nicely with the fact that each organism was specially and uniquely created, with the creator using some common design among the organisms. In fact, Ebersberger et al. Explained in their 2007 Mapping Human Genetic Ancestry paper in Molecular Biology and Evolution, thus, in 2/3 of the cases, a genealogy results in which humans and chimpanzees are not each other's closest genetic relatives. The corresponding genealogies are incongruent with the species tree. In concordance with the experimental evidences, this implies that there is no such thing as a unique evolutionary history of the human genome. Rather, it resembles a patchwork of individual regions following their own genealogy. Translation: the genetic evidence does not support common descent, but resembles a patchwork of genes among the organisms, which could be best explained by a common designer. And I would suggest that common designer was the one the Apostle John spoke of in John chapter 1, verse 3. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. John was speaking of Jesus Christ, who created a human form to live in and sacrifice for your sins and mine, and rising from the dead so you could have confidence that he really was the way to eternal life. You'll notice a consistent reporting in these weekly shows. It seems every week another fossil is unearthed which shows exactly what we would expect to see were the book of Genesis true: stasis in the fossil record. This week, we have a report in the Public Library of Science 1 on a wonderful find of fossil sea cows, manatees. Fossils taken from Florida, India, and Mexico all reveal that from 28 million years ago through to 3 million years ago, we see the evolutionary sequence of manatees evolving over millions of years into manatees. Brian Thomas from the Institute of Creation Research also pointed to a recent Chinese science bulletin describing fossil salamanders so well preserved that even their stomach contents were visible. Allegedly 150 million years old, the Chinese researchers remarked how these fossil salamanders look just like the giant Chinese salamander. So, 150 million years has caused the salamander to evolve into the salamander. This is what we typically see in the fossil record. Very little change, stasis, in stark contrast to what we would expect if evolution were true, and matching exactly what is described 10 times in the first chapter of Genesis, where God created everything to reproduce faithfully after its kind. This is powerful evidence for creation, and to say it's common in the fossil record is an understatement. Mail for me? Wow! Not only was there a lot of discussion on last week's show, there was a lot of good comments and questions brought, and I'm afraid I won't be able to recite them all. Now, God Has No Mother did a fine job trying to explain prophecy in the gospel to those who would not hear. I salute you. Awesome job, Ian. For some, it's enough a hammer. For others, you might need a sledgehammer. You are pressing so much stuff into one episode, I have a hard time following. Laugh out loud. Thank you, Ian, for exposing so-called evidence for evolution. God bless. Another enjoyable episode, Ian. On Pikaia, I would add that new discoveries emphasize the gap between this creature and the worm, popular colloquialism, wow, there's a mouthful, from which we are supposed to have evolved. Also, there is at least one fossil dated older, but appears more advanced. Museum claims fish-like fossil is oldest ever vertebrate. Mike Corder, Associate Press writer, October 22nd, 2003. Tadpole-shaped fossil, a 2.56-inch fish-like animal, is believed to be at least 560 million years old. Good point. Let us also remember the jawless fish fossils found in China in 1999, allegedly dated 530 million years old, which would be 25 million years older than the bird's ass shales. So that's just another example of vertebrate fossils before our alleged ancient ancestor. Now that true believers in evolutionism have extended their family tree, perhaps they will be brave enough to go for Dr. Joseph Mastropolo's Life Science Prize. Wazooloo is on the government's spreading subversive material list. Be prepared to be rounded up and re-educated, brainwashed, at the local FEMA camp. And that's why I am broadcasting from a different top-secret hideout every week. One White Moon wrote in with an interesting question which stirred a lot of response. If it's science, explain why are dolphins grouped under mammals and not under fish? They have fins and many things in common with fish. I'll tell you why. Someone decided that having milk glands is more important. It's completely subjective. Why are marsupial mice and mice not in the same group? Because someone decided to sort out animals out by an arbitrary rule. Do they have a pouch? We may as well divide them by colors. It won't be any less scientific. True, and while I don't really have a problem with people classifying organisms in this way, the classification in no way demonstrates evolution. For example, where on earth would you put the duck-billed platypus? In fact, this classification system was actually invented by a creationist, Linnaeus, who referred to the organism groups as species because he believed they were specially created. Now, I get a lot of people complaining about the term kinds, asking for a definition of kind, which is fair enough. But the problem is that for both definitions of species and kinds, you will have exceptions to the definition. Now, the bottom line I wish to make, though, is that classifying organisms does not affirm evolutionary ascent. Mr. Alien Assassin responded to One White Moon with, marsupials are mammals. Rodents, mice are marsupials. Organisms such as Antechinus, a genus of small marsupials, which are not real mice because they have many differences from rodents, e.g. they are marsupials, are nocturnal, are located on a different continent, etc., and are thus ordered as Dasyuromorphia rather than Rodentia. Experience in science has proven creation is false. If you can explain how the vestigial hind limbs of cetaceans serve a purpose, then you can talk. Really? This canard was actually answered decades ago. The alleged leg bones are different between the males and females because these bones serve a purpose in the reproductive systems of cetaceans. They are muscle anchors and claspers. There are no vestigial hind limbs on cetaceans. They serve a very real purpose. Okay, great. Let's say you have debunked evolution. Go write a paper, publish it in Nature or any other scientific journal, and get recognition for your peer-reviewed biologists. Then I'm pretty sure the Nobel Prize and fame will be waiting for you. Has no one ever tried that? Maybe a side question. How does creation explain the apparent stupid design of some things, like the laryngeal nerve of the giraffe? Mosley, or however you pronounce that, seeing as how you cannot create a giraffe from scratch, then you are in absolutely no position to be criticizing the design of said giraffe. You need to watch my Crevo rant number 67, Poor Design. It is horribly ignorant and arrogant to make such criticisms. The laryngeal nerve argument was answered a long time ago by Dr. Jerry Bergman here. Ian, I was recently confronted with the claim that a rooster was born with human teeth and a tail, but upon a very quick Google search, I could only find two contradictory articles that used the same photo of a chicken embryo. One claimed the teeth were an accidental discovery in an embryo, and the other claimed that scientists had unlocked sleeping genes for functional teeth. What's the real scoop? Thanks for your tireless work. Genesis Week is what I look most forward to during the week. Oh yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's true that chickens have recessive genes for teeth. In fact, going by the fossil record, many birds had teeth that have been lost over time. That's reverse evolution. Now, as for human teeth, I don't know who told you that, but I'd be asking for a reference. Same with the tail. I don't know what to tell you because this person did not provide you with a reference. So I'd call them on that and ask for a reference first. Ian Springer-Verlag will publish scientific research subject to independent and unbiased peer review. The Sanford book review process was biased by creationists, and so not eligible to be called fairly peer-reviewed. Springer-Verlag is attempting to maintain the reputation as providing fair evaluations of submitted work. The review process is rigorous. If creation science can meet an unbiased test of this standard, they will get published. The science needs to stand on its own without bias. Thanks for writing in. And indeed, I recognize that if the science can meet an unbiased test, it will get published. As I previously mentioned, many creationists have published in peer-reviewed journals. I've also been a part of the process, both as the one getting reviewed and as a reviewer. However, in this particular case, with Springer-Verlag, the executive vice president of corporate communications at Springer gave the reason why the book was run through additional peer review. Springer was unaware of the role of the book editors in the intelligent design movement and said Springer does not endorse intelligent design as a legitimate area of scientific research. Notice he mentioned absolutely nothing of the content of the book. There was no problem. The book had already gone through vetting by 2 Springer reviewers. It was only after Sanford's personal beliefs were brought up that the book was yanked. This is open, flagrant bigotry. Several people asked why I didn't present proof of creation. Hello, Mr. Juby. Your videos are spent trying to debunk the evidence for evolution, and it is interesting and all, but I was wondering when you would provide evidence for creation. There are plenty of questions that are raised when an evolutionist asks something like, what happened to the physical attributes of the snake, legs, vocal cords, intelligence to speak? What are creationists supposed to say? Evolutionists ask for more than God did it. So let's say you are right, evolution is wrong. What is the evidence for creation? I always try to debunk this crap, but with so much of it, I give up early in the video. The footprint allegedly found by creationists in the 80s doesn't look like a footprint at all. Evolution has not been falsified just because tetrapods have been discovered slightly older than the oldest we knew of before, and even if it had been falsified, that wouldn't prove the biblical count at all. Non sequitur alert. It bugs me how smug you look as you arrogantly proclaim your book to be true. Ah, but do not mistake confidence for smugness. I am confident, not smug. There are numerous things wrong with your premise. First of all, as I'm sure you're already aware, science cannot prove something. It can only disprove something. So all too often, evidence for creation is also evidence against evolution. The two happen at the same time. Secondly, if you paid close attention, you'll notice that I have provided evidence for creation. One bit of evidence I've beat to death is stasis in the fossil record. Evolution requires change over time, a gaining of novel features and functions in an organism over time, and a fossil order. I've showed over and over again with literally dozens of examples, including the tetrapod footprints, how the alleged fossil sequence is wrong, or how it is in the wrong order, and the organisms we find in the fossil record show extinction and stasis, neither of which help evolution, and both of which fit perfectly within the creation model. 10 times in the first chapter of Genesis alone, it says God created life to reproduce after its kind. Therefore, good evidence for creation would be life forms showing little to no change between the fossil record and modern times, which is exactly what we see. We also see profound evidence for a worldwide flood, which does 2 things. It refutes the idea of deep time because deep time is only used to explain away the evidence left behind by Noah's flood, and it simultaneously affirms the Genesis account, which talks about a worldwide flood. And by the way, the footprints in the Tibet sandstone are a dead ringer match to the footprints in the Coconino sandstone. Compare them yourself. For channels like this, there should be 2 like bars. One for whether you agree, which is basically what it is now, and one for whether you were entertained. I don't agree with what you're saying, but your videos are hilarious, especially the mailbag bits. Woohoo, mail for me. Thanks for writing in, Not James, and yes, you are certainly welcome to disagree with me. Hi, Ian. I think there are 2 things you should have mentioned. Fully formed vertebrates predate Pacaya. In fact, most of the so-called transitional fossils are found in the incorrect order. Some fish, like the Lepidogalaxius, have a neck, but they are still 100% fish. So finding a fossil fish with a neck, like Tiktaalik, proves nothing. Thank you to everyone who wrote in, and thank you for watching. I hope you'll join me again next Genesis Week. I'm your host, Ian Juby, signing off for now. Remember, you can share this video with your frenemies on Twitface Plus using the convenient share button down below, remember the words of our Creator who gave us a hope, showing us that He was the way, the truth, and the life. We'll see you next time.
Production software was provided for Genesis Week by the Big Valley Creation Science Museum, located just 25 minutes north of Drumheller, Alberta. Visit bbcsm.com for more details. You can help keep this program going by making a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, K2A2